Okay, we might get started, everyone. Well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us. Sending you a warm welcome to everyone here with us online today. This is our last webinar for March for our Research Evaluation Network. We've had a very busy couple of months. So first I thought I'd share all the recordings from recent webinars that we've held recently that you may have missed or you want some time to catch up on. So I'll just share those with you quickly in the chat now. And also just a reminder that this session will be recorded. So if you don't want your face shown in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off. Uh, and these are the links to all the recordings now. So the theme of the webinar today is outcome measurement in the community sector. And we have a wonderful guest speaker here with us today, Katie McDonald, who's here from YFS. And she's going to talk to their key learnings on outcome measurement. So I'll introduce Katie shortly. So just quickly for the agenda. I'm going to give a really brief 5-minute update on our network, and then I'll hand it over to Katie. And there will be some time for some Q&A after Katie's presentation. And I'll also highlight some upcoming opportunities that you may like to get involved with at the end of today's webinar. So just a couple of housekeeping things to note. By default, you will be on mute, but your camera will be turned on. So if you don't Again, if you don't want your face shown in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off now. And this session will be recorded. The PowerPoint slides will be made available after the session as well. So if during Q&A you'd like to ask a question, you can write the question in the chat function. And the other option is you can raise your hand using the raise your hand emoji and then take yourself off mute to ask the question. And please introduce yourself and what organization you work for as well. So if we run out of time for Q&A, we can follow up with you individually after the session. Just pop your question in the chat function. Thanks. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. I acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people of the lands on which I work and live here in Meanjin in Brisbane. I'd like to pay my respects to all First Nations colleagues joining us online today. I'm joining you from along the beautiful Maiwar River, Brisbane River in Kurilpa in West End. And for those online, please feel free to join us in acknowledging country where you are today through the chat function as well. So my name is Amy Dellett. For those of you who may not know me, I'm the data and reporting analyst in the research and policy team at QCOS, and I coordinate our research evaluation network webinars and our online forum, as well as providing data capability support internally to QCOS and externally to our members as well. So if you're new to our network, you may want to review our terms of reference, which we'll send out in the post-event webinar email. And the terms of reference we review annually, so an update as needed. So please reach out if you'd like to discuss the terms of reference or provide any feedback. Our team's email address is research@qcos.org.au. In terms of membership, network meetings and webinars are open to everyone. However, we do encourage social service staff in research and evaluation roles, particularly to attend. And this network is open to QCOS members and non-members. So if you work in the community sector and you find these webinars valuable, we'd really encourage you to consider membership, which can be either individual membership or membership through your organisation. So the Research Evaluation Network is really an opportunity for collaboration and knowledge sharing in data analysis, research and evaluation for the community services sector in Queensland. So you can learn more about focused topics, for example, data visualization, storytelling, communicating impact or qualitative research, capturing community voice, evaluation resources and frameworks. So you can access our Research and Evaluation Network webinar recordings and resources on the Community Door Research and Evaluation Resources Hub page. And I'll share those links with you in the chat now as well. So also as a friendly reminder, we do have a research and evaluation forum that sits within the Microsoft Teams platform. So I've shared the instructions to you now on how you can join the forum in your own time. And also just in terms of communication, I do also email the network about once a month about upcoming network events. So keep an eye out for those emails in your inbox. So now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's event, Katie McDonald, who is the Research and Evaluation Manager at YFS in Logan. So over the past 7 years, Katie has led the establishment of the organisation's outcomes measurement approach and developed their monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. This work has enabled YFS to build its evidence base, improve services and demonstrate impact. She has a background in monitoring and evaluation, research and organisational development. So I've personally had the opportunity to know Katie in her role at YFS for a couple of years now. And so YFS is an organisation really leading the way in evaluation and outcome measurement in our sector. And they've got some really fantastic examples of program evaluations to draw on and learn from, but also through the lens of the whole of the organisational approach to evaluation and outcome measurement. So really looking forward to today's presentation and the opportunity to showcase the evaluation expertise that exists within our sector. So again, at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A, and I'll now hand it over to Katie and stop sharing my screen.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me and thanks to everybody for coming along on a Monday morning and putting some time aside. I'll just get my slides up and running. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me fine. So as Amy mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about our outcomes measurement journey here at YFS. Over the last probably almost a decade now, we've been working on it and, still continue to work on it. We've learned a lot through that time, so I'm happy to share our experience and our learnings along the way.
Katie, can I just briefly mention, I can't see your video. I don't know if you wanted to turn on your camera. There you are. Hello.
There we go. All right. Technical problems resolved. We can carry on. Thanks, Amy.
No worries.
Before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm coming from today, which is the Yuggera and Yugambeh speaking people here in Logan, and to just pay my respects to their contribution, both to the work of YFS and to the broader community where we work. So for those of you who don't know YFS, just a little bit of background. We're a place-based organisation working in Logan and surrounding areas, and we work across the spectrum of human and social services. We've got about 20 programs on the go at any one time. And I guess that's just a little bit of context to sort of set the scene. So YFS is more defined by our place than we are by any particular social issue or cohort. And I guess all those sorts of things have an impact on how we might go about setting up an outcomes measurement approach. And I guess every organisation is really different in terms of size and scope and focus area. And all of those things play a big role in terms of setting up outcomes and working towards outcomes measurement. So I guess here are a couple of key milestones in our journey so far. These are probably more like annual themes than they are actual sort of milestones in terms of when things started or finished. In reality, a lot of this work was all sort of happening simultaneous, and a lot of it is still ongoing. So the first thing that we did when we started was set up a couple of key metrics that were relevant across the whole organisation, regardless of the program or the focus area. That was our organisational outcomes, and the metrics were around housing, financial security, and social connectedness. Beyond that, though, we really focused on the programs themselves. And in terms of setting up our outcomes measurement approach, the first thing that we actually wanted to do was establish program logic. So really dig into what are these programs trying to achieve and how do we think we're going to do that. So we began a process of working with each and every program around program logics and then performance measurement and sort of ongoing reviewing and refining at that program level. That took some time because, as I mentioned, there's about 20 programs and being a really iterative process, we kept doing that for a number of years. After we'd sort of been through that part of the journey, we'd really got a much deeper understanding of how our programs worked and what they were trying to achieve. And we were able to develop our organisational level theory of change, which really just pulled together some of the common themes that made sense across all of the programs, regardless of what they were doing. And we were also able to develop our monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. So those were some very significant milestones, but we're not quite done yet. So we've still got ambitions for 2024 and beyond, where we're working around streamlining some of our data collection and really developing some nifty little visualizations. So today I'm going to dig into a few of these different areas, but if you've got any questions about anything along the way, feel free to ask me or pop it in the chat. So in terms of our overall approach, I guess it was very purpose-led. Our driving purpose for this was really around service effectiveness. So we wanted to make sure that our services were based on the best available evidence and that we were able to demonstrate that they were effective and understand change so that we could continue to design and develop effective services and really get those demonstrable impacts here in Logan. The process of how we went about it was quite a bottom-up and developmental process, as I mentioned, with lots of iterative learning cycles. So we really focused in on that program level and spent a lot of time thinking, what are we going to achieve? How do we want to do this? What does that look like? How do we measure it? How do we know we're achieving what we set out to achieve? So once we'd been through the kind of program logic process, we set up our performance measurement framework, which is a standard sort of results-based performance measurement process, which focuses on what we do, how well we do it, and what's changed as a result. And I guess the other layer that we're interested in is really how relevant is it to the people that we're working and whether it meets their needs, so that we can get a better understanding of who does our approach work for and in what circumstances. So we're interested in those sorts of questions too. So we collect a range of information around people's demographics and circumstances, as well as those outputs in terms of our key deliverables so that we know we're meeting our contract expectations, as well as people's satisfaction with the services, and finally outcomes. So it's part of a much broader sort of approach of measuring performance in the organisation. In terms of, whoopsie daisy, here we go. So one of the big things, I guess, the first decisions that we came across was which tool do we select? And there's a whole lot of different types of tools out there, from prescribed tools to validated tools to ones that might be common tools in the sector but not necessarily validated, and bespoke ones that we might develop in-house. We actually have probably all of those tools in the mix at the moment. So across our 20 programs, we use a whole range of different tools. Some of the considerations that we went through in terms of thinking about which tool to use, I guess the key one was really around alignment to program objectives. So we really wanted to make sure we were measuring the thing we were trying to achieve, and that the tool we chose was suitable for the context and the cohort, that it was easy to use, record and report on. We'd take into account things like cost associated with it, whether that's related to licensing or training or the general sort of setup of using that tool, and the audience as well. So in general, a lot of the tools that we might select for outcomes measurement are for internal reflection and performance improvement. But sometimes we might have a pilot project or something like that where we really want to be able to showcase the effectiveness of that service externally. And so we might decide to use a different type of tool for that process. So we might say we need stronger evidence, so we're going to go for a validated tool than what we might need in a different context. And sometimes we might even use a mix of tools. So some programs that have different objectives, or they might be working at a whole of family level. We might have some tools for parents and some tools for children and those sorts of things. The reason we would sometimes use a bespoke tool is actually if we couldn't find one on the shelf that aligned very well with the program objectives. So sometimes we would look at what we're trying to achieve and then develop our own scale to go along with that, as well as some rubrics to help define the scale across the various domains that we were looking to measure. So I guess in terms of implementing our outcomes measurement approach, there was a lot of considerations and some challenges and enablers along the way. Some of the considerations were around administration of the tool. Generally, most of the tools that we use are administered on a pre and post test format. For longer services that might run for 6 months or 12 months or a year, we might have a couple of midpoint reviews built in along the way too. In other services, we also actually do post-service check-ins as well, so we can assess the sort of sustainability of the work along the way. We're also considering whose perspective it is that we're measuring. Is it the worker's perspective, or is it the people that we're working with perspective, or is it actually a joint perspective? And that varies across programs and tools, how we've done that. We'll consider whether the tool itself needs some adaptation to help with the fit in terms of context and cohort. So that might be tweaking the layout or the wording or the design elements, but still retaining the intent of the tool and the sort of concept integrity, I guess. And then we're thinking about how can we really embed it into practice and into our systems and that sort of thing. Some of the challenges that we've come up along the way. I guess with any sort of implementation process, it is a change process, and that always brings some challenges with it, some resistance, and that's normal. A couple of the main concerns that had come through when we were going through the process of setting up these tools and putting them in place was concerns about engagement process. A lot of our programs work in quite a relational manner, and people wanted to ensure that the program was still relationship driven rather than assessment driven. So we did a lot of work around thinking about, well, how can we incorporate these tools into practice without it feeling like an assessment? And so that could be adopting a more sort of conversational style, but also treating it as a exploration activity rather than an assessment activity, and really using that to inform the work. The other one that came up was, I guess, lack of confidence in the data, because people had been recording data and sort of sending it off and they sort of felt like it was going into a black hole and didn't know what the data said or what it meant or what the integrity of it was. That was when I started with the organisation in 2017. We'd been collecting organisational outcomes data for about a year or so, but hadn't had the internal capacity to really analyse or dig into that data. So when I started looking at it, that was one of the big bits of feedback that came up. So we really spent a lot of time focusing in on the data and what it said so we could build that confidence in it and refine our processes as we went. Some of the big enablers along the way were having a learning culture, so general open and willingness to look at how we're doing and learn from it. We had a couple of key champions from the top, which really helped. Our CEO was very committed to the process, and a few people in the senior executive were keen on data, and they really were strong champions of this approach and helped to get everybody excited. When we were working through program by program, our main strategy was to start where there was energy, where there was a champion, and build off that momentum. So I guess we started with the easy services first, the easy spaces, and then kind of built it up from there. And by the time we'd sort of been through most of the programs, the last ones that we were left were actually super keen to get on board because they'd seen other teams do it and they were really excited. They were like, when is it our turn? You know, we want one. We want to know how we're doing too. And so I guess having that really purposeful approach to what we were doing was beneficial, and integrating the outcomes into both practice and our systems. So all of our outcomes measurement tools are embedded within our client management systems so that they don't have to live separately or be on some other database or some random bits of paper. It's all embedded in the system and the processes as people are working, doing their work. The other big thing I think was really sharing our achievements and feeding that information back to teams and back to workers. Prior to that, people, didn't really know how the program was performing. They knew on an individual client basis where they'd had successes or where they'd had challenges. But that sort of perspective of being able to step away and look at, well, how is the whole program doing? How is the whole organisation doing? We hadn't really had that before. So people really appreciated seeing that and seeing the sort of bigger picture of what they were achieving through the work they were doing on the ground. Oh, I put this in as a little example of how we've adapted one of the tools for our young parents program, our young families program. This is a version of the PWI that operates on a scale of Kim to Kim. So it's just something a bit of fun. We try and have fun where we can. We also have a plain version of this tool for people who might find this a little bit overstimulating. Okay, so now I guess I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the bumps in the road that we might have come across. When we dug into the data, we found a few challenges with interpretation, both at the sort of collection level and at the sort of insight level, I guess. So up on the screen here, I've got a copy of a little snapshot of our DSS score tool. A lot of organisations use that. This is what it looks like when it's sort of embedded in our system. So you can see it's kind of removed of any descriptions or any of the sort of content behind it, and it's just got that basic scale of low to high across the different domains, and people select whichever one is most appropriate. When I was looking at the data in the early days, it was looking a bit murky. Everything was sort of just in the middle, and the pattern didn't look right. So it's like, oh, I'm not sure what this means or how to interpret it. So when I looked at it deeper, I could see that some people seem to be using the scale in opposite directions. And then when I sort of thought about it, that idea of low to high, well, what does high actually mean? Does it mean that the circumstances are positive or that the needs are high? And people had different interpretations of that and were rating the scale differently. And so by looking at the data, we were able to identify that and go back and do a bit of sort of retraining, revisit those definitions and get everybody on the same page, and of course backdate a whole lot of data so that it was actually accurate and useful for us to understand our performance. Oh, this is another example where in the analysis the interpretation of the data was not clear. So this is one of our organisational outcomes metrics around social connectedness. The question asks, if you needed to, could you ask someone outside of the home for support in a time of crisis? And then a follow-up question of who would you ask? And there's a range of different options that people could select. When we first started looking at this data, we'd get really high numbers that a lot of people exited with a source of support. But we could also see that community organisations were the most common source of support. So it was a little bit hard to understand what that meant, and people had different perspectives on it. So on the one hand, some people were interpreting that as that we were promoting help seeking by connecting people in with community organisations, but other people thought that, well, maybe this isn't the best outcome because maybe we're actually creating service dependence. And so the whole process of looking at the data was able to stimulate a lot of different conversations around what that meant and what it meant for our work. So in response to that, we actually reworked some of the options of support a little bit, and we started analysing the data differently. So now we actually break it down into informal and formal supports, so we can see the difference and we can see where we might need to put a little bit more energy into developing that, because we recognise that both informal and formal support systems are really helpful for people at different times in their lives. So we refined our process a little bit there. We've also been able to do some pretty cool stuff with our data in terms of turning insights into innovation. One of our probably most significant insights was actually the idea that specialists get better results in their area of focus. But generalist workers are better equipped to do the long-term work that helps sort of sustain those outcomes. So we could see that really clearly in our housing data. We know that everyone, regardless of the program or the focus area, that housing is an issue that was coming up a lot, even more so now. But we could see that those dedicated housing specialists, where that is their sole focus, really got great results compared to the workers who are working across a whole spectrum of different things, who are more sort of concentrated on building skills and stuff like that along the way. So we took that idea, that insight, and did a bit of a service design process around how we could develop integrated services that actually brought together the best of both worlds. From that, we developed our Thriving Families demonstration project, where we tested out the idea that in turn generated a whole lot of learnings, which has subsequently gone into a whole suite of integration projects that we're working on at the moment. And we continue to learn from each one and build our understanding about service integration so that we can really be bringing together the best of every discipline, figuring out how to work together really effectively to wrap the supports around people that they need. So in terms of using the data, we also use it to inform practice. So we've got a couple of standard processes that we've put into place. One is an annual program review. So every year at the end of the financial year, we'll do a sort of a snapshot for each team, looking at both the outcomes and anything that's kind of interesting or emerging from the data, and have a sort of reflective process around what that means, where we might want to focus on in the coming year, if there's any key trends or anything like that we should be aware of. We also do a First Nations data analysis, where we dig into a lot of our outcomes data and compare outcomes for First Nations people and non-Indigenous people, so we can really get a sense of if there's any areas where we need to concentrate our efforts better, and we understand what that looks like. We do that on the calendar year so that we can sort of balance it out a little bit. So we're generally twice a year we're sort of having a deep dive, and then obviously we might have evaluations and other processes like that as well that give us opportunities to dig in deeper. But in terms of annual processes, we're looking at stuff at least once or twice a year across every team. So based on all of those learnings over a number of years, we were able to develop our organisational theory of change. And Amy can share that in the chat so you can have a look at it. These are some of the common elements, though, that define how we work. So we really want to understand the people that we're working with and their needs, do what it takes to provide individualised responses, focus on enabling change, so really equipping people for the long term, and not just resolving those immediate sort of circumstances. We work together in terms of collaborating internally and externally to get the best outcomes possible. We listen and learn, both through our research and evaluation processes, but also, listening to the voices of the people that we're working with and feeding that into service design. And we try and use all of that to influence the world around us more broadly. I guess when it came time to develop our theory of change, we had a really good idea about the what we wanted to achieve as an organisation, and we had a really good idea about the challenges and opportunities that we were facing as well. And I guess it was these middle bits about how we get from one end to the other that we were able to explore and understand further through our outcomes measurement work. We were also then able to set up our monitoring and evaluation and learning framework, which really kind of just summarises and pulls together all of the things that we do in this space. It also hosts our research agenda, which is really kind of a wish list of things we'd like to know and explore through our research, through our evaluations and our outcomes data. And it hosts our evaluation schedule too. So we've got a rolling evaluation schedule where we try and do at least a few evaluations every year and work through program by program. So we have that opportunity to dig deep and learn a bit more intensively about what we're doing and what we're achieving. So that getting to that point, I guess, was a pretty significant kind of milestone. But for anyone who's out there who likes hiking, when you get to the top of one peak and you have a look around, you see another peak usually on the horizon. So there's still work to do. And that work for us in the next sort of year or two is really going to be focused on visualisation and streamlining some of our data processes. So far, it's been quite manual in terms of, I guess, lots of systems, lots of tools, lots of kind of extracting and kind of gluing data sets together and that sort of thing. So we're hoping to streamline that, at least with our larger data sets, such as our organisational outcomes. So this is one we've started on already. And here you can see it's got a sort of key outcomes. So you can see all of the major outcomes at a sort of snapshot level. And then each of those we can dig into deeper and have a look, so we can see the entry and exit status for every area, as well as the percentage of people to improve. And that can all be filtered by time, by program or program area, and by a whole range of demographics, so we can dig in deep and have a good look at that. And I think what's really exciting about this is that it really hands over some of the ownership of the data to staff and managers, so they can interact with it in their own terms and look at all the things that they're interested in looking at. So I guess a little bit of a recap from me in terms of what's worked here at YFS. So our approach was purposeful and context driven. What worked here might not work in other contexts. Different organisations might have different purposes, different focuses, those sorts of things. We took a bottom-up sort of developmental type approach, which was probably a little bit slower, but it was really important for us to build that buy-in along the way and make sure we were bringing everyone along on the journey, and that everybody was committed to the outcomes measurement approach. Working with momentum in terms of where there was energy and kind of just running with that. Integration into both practice and systems. Getting hands-on with the data, so high levels of familiarity with what it was saying and what it meant, and really kind of digging in and asking questions of it. An iterative sort of learning approach, so not just set and forget, here's the tools, here's the data, we're done now, but really digging in, continuing to learn, continuing to reflect and explore and grow. Resourcing is obviously an important kind of consideration in terms of doing this work. So here at YFS, we've got internal and external capacity to do this work. In terms of, I guess, I'm the internal resource, and as I said, I've been here since 2017, so for about 7 years. But we've also worked closely with consultants and things like that along the way, who've helped us set up some processes and helped us with some of that developmental side of things as well. And I guess critical is the enabling leadership and culture. So really driven from the top, but everybody getting that buy-in and being willing to sort of participate and learn along the way. So that is about it for me in terms of some of the key highlights, but I'm happy to take questions and have a chat. And I'd love to hear some examples from other people where you might have taken a similar approach or even done the opposite approach, but that's worked well for you in your context. So my contact details are also there at the bottom of the page. If anyone wants to drop me a line afterwards, I'm happy to touch base with anyone. Yeah. So
Thank you so much,
there we
Katie.
go.
Let's have a see. There's no comments or questions in the chat. If anyone wants to take themselves off mute, we've got a smaller group today. So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask Katie a question. There was, in terms of the pre-webinar questions, because when people register for the event, they can ask questions. So there was one question, but I'd say it's probably more a comment than a question. So they just said, I'd love to know more about what you're doing to capture longer term service impact data. I think you already kind of addressed that, Katie, but if you wanted to speak more to that. And you answered my question too. Mine was more around resourcing as well. So you just covered that. There's a question in the chat now. Oh yeah, so from Kylie, was there any resistance from staff? And if so, how did you get past that?
Yeah. So in terms of the long-term outcomes question, I'll start with that one. So we do have in some programs, as I mentioned, post-service follow-ups, which enables us to track the sustainability of outcomes over time. So for example, in our housing space, we do check-ins at 4, 7 and 12-month points where we've been able to set up, help people establish housing. And so that helps us if it's both to measure, I guess, the sustainability of those outcomes, but it also provides an opportunity to check in if things are starting to wobble, perhaps, especially if somebody's in like a 6-month tenancy. We check in at that 4-month mark so we can see if it's starting to wobble, what can we put in place to help prevent it from falling over, because we've still got time, still got a couple of months to work through that. We don't do that in all services though. That's only in some spaces that we do that. Otherwise we would probably dig into it sort of on an ad hoc basis through evaluations and those particular things when we had a sort of specific interest to do that. In terms of the resistance question, I think that was, I touched on that a little bit in terms of, I guess, the biggest resistance was around the impact that it might have on engagement with people. And so a lot of it, I guess, was just a lot of conversations around what it would look like, how to go about it, how you might introduce the tools or the idea of the tools in different conversations, how you might frame it so it feels less of an assessment and more of just a conversation, some of those things like that. But it really was just a lot of conversations. It was that sort of developmental approach where we kind of unpacked what some of the challenges and barriers were and kept kind of working with it. And I think the approach of kind of just building that momentum meant that eventually everyone sort of got on board, because it was so normalized by the end of that sort of process that sort of resistance just kind of dissolved, I guess. But it did take, I guess, a certain degree of patience in terms of allowing people to have their resistance, express their concerns, and sort of work through how we would address that, or how we could kind of overcome that, different strategies and that sort of thing. So I hope that answers your question, Kylie.
That's great. Thank you. I'm wondering if people might not be able to unmute themselves, but I'm happy to read out the questions too. Yeah, it's a really great point that you put up about developmental evaluation. We're going to do a webinar in July for more details of if anyone's interested in learning about that approach. We're going to have Clear Horizons Consulting are going to come and talk to us about that. So it's a good link in there. We've also got a question from Waylin. Hi, Katie, great presentation. Can you share more about presenting data to the frontline staff and getting that feedback loop going? Are they interested in the data? What frequency works best?
Yeah. So we try a lot of approaches to presenting data, because I guess one approach might get traction with some people, but it might not get traction with other people. So usually when we have an all staff meeting, which happens every quarter, we might throw out a little bit of data in that process, just so it's sort of regular and present. So often we'll do data trivia, which is kind of just a bit of a bit of fun and sometimes can be quite surprising for people. And that's usually tied to whatever theme we're exploring through that staff meeting. So it's always a bit different, always a bit sort of random, just to keep it fun and interesting. We also have, every team has regular sort of service development meetings. So sometimes we might explore a theme through those conversations. So not looking at all the data, but a program manager might say, oh, we're interested in looking at this topic this month. Is there any data around that? Can you come along and we'll have a chat about it. Sometimes we'll do specific forums. So for example, with our First Nations data analysis, sometimes we'll do a forum on that, and we usually include a mix of data and stories and different experiences, so that it just engages with people on different levels. There's definitely people who are not that interested in the data and people who are super interested. So I'd say we've sort of got the whole spectrum on the go at any one time. And I guess some people have, I think, a bit of almost like a fear of numbers. Just the idea of like looking at data just sounds really sort of intimidating, and they kind of, I guess, at risk of sort of shutting down as soon as the data word comes across. So we really just try and keep it fun and mix it up and keep it relevant and purposeful, I think, so that it's engaging to as many people as possible. And then we do those sort of annual review processes that I was talking about, so we can, that's really tailored for each team. So we're not talking about like generic data that people feel quite disconnected from. It's really their data, their program, their outcomes, and those conversations are always exploratory in nature, where it's like, this is what the data says, now what does it mean? Because I think, it's got to be connected to the sort of practice work that they're doing.
That's great. I love the data trivia. That's so cool. Yeah, really great explanation. There's a couple of other questions as well. So we've got a little bit more time, so I'll go through them now. So Lily was asking, in simple terms, what would you say YFS is and your role to someone you don't know?
Sure. That's always a tricky question, I think, because so much of this kind of work, there's a lot of jargony shorthand that everyone in the sector kind of knows, and you can throw out some sort of jargon definition, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone who's not in the sector. So I usually talk about just the fact that I work for a organisation that's delivering services, working to support people who might be doing it tough, and that my role is to help understand what sort of a difference we're making through the work that we're doing. I usually just try and keep it as simple as possible.
That's great. And we've got I think it's a comment rather than a question. So great presentation to and overall approach to evaluation, Katie. No questions as of now. Really enjoyed the connection between insights and innovation in particular. Thank you for sharing. So if there's no other questions, I would just like to say a huge thank you. It's really great to be able to have these conversations and showcase, the work to the sector. Yeah, really amazing work that you're doing. So yeah, congratulations. And we look forward to continuing to see all of the great work from YFS. Really cool, great work to, start those dashboards as well, which is always exciting work and challenging work. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, just really wanted to say we appreciate you sharing all of that learning and knowledge, over the last, what was it, 7 years that you've been at YFS. So
Yeah.
it's such a journey. So nice to hear that experience. And yeah, everyone's just saying thank you. Great presentation. Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing. So yeah, we'll share the resources and the webinar recording and the PowerPoint presentation. And then if everyone wants to stay online, we might actually finish a little bit early today, which is exciting. I've got a couple of things that we can go through for the network. Did you want to have any last comments, Katie? Or
No, thank you. That's a lot of talking for me in one go, so I'll probably just leave it there.
Totally.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll start sharing my screen again so everyone can see what's coming up for us. And pop this over here. So there's just a couple more things to go through, which so in terms of upcoming opportunities that you may like to get involved with, I'll just share these links to some events coming up in the chat for you now. And so this is an overview of our draft plan for the network in the next couple of months. So the focus topic for these webinars were really informed by our end of year evaluation survey and ongoing feedback that we've received from the sector. So we have an upcoming session planned on co-design and incorporating lived and living experience and expertise in evaluation. And we also have a webinar on data privacy and capturing consent. And the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak Centre for Excellence is going to walk us through their newly developed evaluation framework. A couple of these webinars, you may notice that my colleague Stacey DeKama is facilitating. So Stacey coordinates our quality collaboration network for the sector, and that network is interested in some of the same topics that the Research Evaluation Network is also interested in. So some of the webinars this year will be led or facilitated by Stacey, and others are facilitated by myself. So later on in June, we'll also be hosting a webinar on capturing the voice of children and young people. And like I said, in July, there'll be a webinar on developmental evaluation. And we'll also be hosting a webinar on trauma-informed evaluation in August. Again, that'll be a community organisation sharing knowledge and learnings from the sector. So really looking forward to that one too. We're also finalising some guest speakers for topics exploring opportunities on webinars around culturally safe evaluation methodologies and Indigenous data governance and data sovereignty. And then again, more webinars on like data visualization, data storytelling and communicating impact. So if we don't get through all of the topics this year, we'll definitely keep that in mind and on the agenda for next year as well. So just some more details. So this is the details for the event amplifying the co-design and lived experience leadership and evaluation webinar, and that's coming up on the 11th of April. So we'll be joined by the Mental Illness Fellowship of Australia, who will speak about their journey in co-design and the development of the Finding North and Finding North network. And then the data privacy and capturing consent from vulnerable cohorts event will be held on the 9th of May. And in this meeting, we'll be joined by Professor John Swinson from the University of Queensland and Tonya De Bruin from Your Town to talk about privacy and consent. So we'll be unpacking relevant legislation and case studies that demonstrate practical approaches to gaining consent. So registration for these events are open and online now, and you can register through the links that I shared in the chat. And then lastly, I thought I'd also flag a couple of upcoming webinars that are being delivered by their Health Translation Queensland as part of their autumn seminar series. So there's one on the 26th of March, which is tomorrow, on data management and analytics for healthcare. And then on the 16th of April, they have a topic on Indigenous data sovereignty in health research. So that's basically all from us today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'll give you a few moments if we can complete just to get some feedback and launch our polls for the event today. that would be wonderful. Thank you, Michael, who's working behind the scenes for me here. So yeah, I'll give everyone a few moments to complete the polls for the webinar. And then we'll say goodbye. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today and engaging with today's discussion. I hope some of you can have a wonderful break if you do have a break coming up over the Easter period, and look forward to connecting again in April.